Chapter 7 of the Oath of Aleister la Giafria and of her vigil in the Chapel of Abominations. "Before we go further," began Cyril Grey, "I think it right to express a doubt as to the advisability of our procedure. We have already seen the most determined opposition to our plans, and for my part I would say frankly that it might be wiser, certainly safer, to abandon them." Lisa turned on him like a tigress. "I don't know what your plans are, and don't care, but I didn't think you'd go back on them." "Impulsive ladies," returned Cyril, "rush in where angels fear to tread." "I'll go," said she. "I'm sorry for all that has happened, all," and she fixed her lover with a look of infinite contempt. Cyril shrugged his shoulders. "If you feel like that, of course we can continue, but when the pinch comes, don't squeal. I have warned you." "Brother Cyril could not draw it back if he wished," put in Sister Sybil. "He is bound by his oath, as in a little while you will be." Lisa read upon the woman's face a smile as of triumphant malice. It disturbed her far more than Cyril's protest. Was she indeed in a trap? It might be so. Then Cyril, who had tried to save her, was in the trap too. She must go on, if only to be able to save him when opportunity occurred. At present she was wholly in the dark. She could feel the atmosphere of constraint, of subtle and terrible forces in the abyss, which she was treading blindfold upon some razor edge, whose support she could not even imagine. The adventure was to her a supreme excitement, and she lived first and last for that. Had she known herself better, she would have understood that her love for Cyril was little more than a passion for the bizarre, but at the moment she was Joan of Arc and Juliet in one. Moreover, she had the instinctive feeling that wherever these people might be going, it was certainly somewhere. They were engineers building a bridge to an unknown land, just as methodically and purposefully as the builders of an earthly bridge. There was no doubt as to the validity of their knowledge on their powers. She perceived that Lord Anthony Boleyn had spent his life in the investigation of disjointed, purposeless items of information, mostly playing fraud, while under his very nose the brethren of this order were proceeding calmly with some stupendous task, not troubling even to acquaint the world with their results. And she could dimly guess why this was so, and must be so. They did not wish to be dragged into foolish controversies with the ignorant. And just then Simon If took up the conversation with a remark in tune with that thought. "We shall not ask you for any pledge of secrecy," he said, "for you have only to say that what you see and hear to be laughed at for a liar. If this be our last meeting, we are quits. You will be taken to a little chapel leading from this room. There you will find a circle, which you must enter, being careful not to touch it, even with your dress, for that would be dangerous. Within that circle you must remain until we send for you, unless you wish to leave, in which case you have only to pass through the white curtains in the north. You will find yourself in a lighted passage. Open the door at the end. You will be in the street, where my automobile awaits your orders. Your use of this exit will, however, close your career in magic. In any further relations we should merely be good friends, or I hope so, but we should not consider any proposal to reconstruct the present situation." "I will wait until you send for me," cried Lisa. "I swear it." Simon If placed his hand upon her brow. In another instant he was gone from the room. Sister Sybil rose and took her by the hand. "Come," said she, "but you'd better bid farewell to your lover." The girl once again thrilled to the undertone of malice in the voice, but Cyril took her fondly in his arms and crushed her to him. "Tomorrow," he said, "brave heart, true heart, tomorrow we shall be alone together." Trembling, la Giafria returned to Sister Sybil and followed her to the door of the chapel. She threw a last look over her shoulder. To her amazement, Cyril was regarding her with a cynical smile of amusement. Her heart went deadly cold. She felt the pull of Sister Sybil's hand, suddenly grown iron and inexorable. The door shut behind her with a monstrous clang, and she found herself in a room at once obscure and menacing. She wondered why they called it a chapel. It was a bell-shaped cave. She dimly saw the white curtains of which If had spoken. There was nothing else in the room but a square, thin altar, whose surface was of polished silver, around whose base ran a broad copper band, evidently the circle referred to, and 10 lamps set in little stars of iron, which gave a faint blue light. The entire chamber was cut out of the solid rock. Only that part of it which lay within the circle had been dressed. The rest of the floor and the walls, which bent over to meet in a point, were rough. She stepped carefully into the circle, raising her dress. Sister Sibel faced her squarely. In the woman's face Lisa read 1,000 evil purposes, a cruelty devilishly hot as Cyril's was devilishly cold, and the assurance in those grey eyes that she had fallen into the power of creatures utterly abominable. Sister Sibel suddenly broke into a short harsh laugh, then stepped aside, and Lisa, turning quickly, only saw the door close behind her. Heedless of caution, she leapt after her in the impulse of self-preservation, but the door was entirely smooth on the inside. She beat against it, uttering a horrible fierce cry, but only silence answered her. The impulse passed as quickly as it had come. Mechanically she stepped back into the circle, and as she did so, the thought of Simon If came to calm her. The other two might puzzle her, but she felt that If would neither do nor suffer wrong. During dinner, too, she had fixed her gaze, fascinated, upon the Mahapera Fang. She knew that he was more than friendly to the order, though not a member of it, and his face, coupled with the fact that he had not spoken even once in her presence, redoubled that confidence. In front of the little altar she discovered, as her eyes accommodated themselves to the dimness, a curiously shapen stool covered with leather. She squatted on it and found it a very paradise of ease. And then it dawned upon her that she had to wait. To wait! There was no sound or movement to fix her attention. Presently she began to amuse herself by making faces at herself in the polished silver of the altar. It was not long before she tired of that, and once again she found herself waiting. Her imagination soon began to people the little room with phantoms. The memory of the thing in the garden began to obsess her. Once again Simon If came to the rescue. She knew that her imagination was at work, and that, even had the shapes about her been real, they could not harm her. She heard herself repeating the old mystic's words, because there is in him no place of death. She became perfectly calm. For a little while her thoughts occupied her. Suddenly they fled, and she found herself, so to speak, in a small open boat, without provisions, in the midst of a limitless ocean of unutterable boredom. She had a period of fits. That over, she became listless, and merely prayed for sleep. Then she noticed that a square pencil of light had entered from the apex of the chapel, and was casting glory upon the top of the altar. She rose instantly, and gasped in amazement, for figures were moving on the silver. 3 men, with strange musical instruments, species respectively of flute, viola, and drum, were walking across the room. This room was hung with rose-coloured curtains, and lit with silver candelabra. At one end was a dais, and on this the men took their seats. They began to tune their instruments, and so strong was her fancy that she thought she heard them. It was a fantastic oriental dance music. Presently a small boy, a negro dressed in a yellow tunic and baggy breeches of pale blue, entered the room. He carried a salver on which were a great flask of wine and 2 goblets of gold. Then, to her utter amazement, Cyril Grey stepped into the room with Sister Sibel. They took the wine from the boy, and each placed in the left hand on the left shoulder of the other. They touched their goblets, and throwing their heads back, drained them. The boy took the empty cups and disappeared. She saw Cyril and Sibel draw together. They gave a laugh which, once again, she fancied she could hear. It rang demonica in her very most soul. An instant more, and the mouths met in a kiss. Lisa felt her knees give way. She caught the altar and saved herself from falling, but she must have lost consciousness for a second or two, for when her eyes opened she saw that they had discarded their robes and were dancing together. It was wild and horrible beyond all imagination. The dancers were locked so closely that they appeared like a single monster of fable, a thing with 2 heads and 4 legs which writhed or leapt in hideous ecstasy. She was so shaken that she did not even ask herself the nature of the vision, whether it was a dream, a hallucination, a picture of the past, or an actual happening. The bacchanal obscenity of it was overwhelming. Again and again she turned her eyes away, but they always returned to the gaze, and every gesture shot a pang of agony to her soul. She understood the ambiguities of her lover. His strange behaviour seemed like an open book to her, and the malice of Sister Cybele, her elfin laughter, her satanic sneer, sunk into her bleeding heart like acid burning, fuming. The revel did not diminish. Instead it took novel and more atrocious forms. All that she had ever conceived of sensuality, of bestiality, was 1,000-fold surpassed. It was an infinite refinement of abomination, joined with an exaggeration of grossness that might have turned George's sands to stone. The light went out. The thought of flight from that abominable chapel never came to her. It was Cyril, the man to whom she had given herself utterly at the first touch, who was plunging this poisoned dagger into her soul, and she could not even die. It was ferocity and madness that awoke in her. She would wait until the morning, and she would find a way to be avenged. Yet she felt that she was slowly bleeding to death. It did not seem that any morning could ever come to her. She would not be able to face Cyril. It seemed somehow as if the shame were hers. And then she screamed aloud. A soft hand was on her shoulder. "Hush, hush," came a gentle voice in her ear. It was the girl who had waited on her at dinner. Even at the time Lisa had noticed that she was very different to the others, for they were of most cheerful countenance, and this girl's eyes were red with weeping. "Come away," said the girl. "Come away, while it is time. This is the first chance I've ever had to escape. I was set to watch the chapel door tonight, and I found the spring. Oh, come away quickly. They're criminals. They corrupt you and they torture you. Oh, do come, sister. I can't escape without you. The man in the automobile would stop me, but if you come, I can slip away. It's only a step through the passage. Oh, God, if I had only gone when I was as you are." Lisa's whole soul went out in sympathy to the gentle creature. "Look what they've done to me. Feel all down my back." The girl winced with pain even at Lisa's gentle fingertips. Her back was a mass of knotted wheels. She must have been beaten savagely with a sandblock or a knot. "And see my arms." The girl lifted her hands, and the loose sleeves of her robe fell back. From wrist to elbow she was a mass of parallel cuts. "I wouldn't do what they wanted," she moaned. "It was too horrible. You'd think no woman would, but they do. Sister Cybele's the worst. Oh, do come from this abominable house." Lisa had touched the summit of the mountain of hysteria. Her feelings were far beyond all expression. She was living in a world deeper than feeling. She gained the consciousness of her own nature, something far deeper than anything she had ever known, and she expressed its will in words of absolute despair. "I can't leave Cyril Grey." "I'm afraid of him more than all the others," whispered the girl. "I loved him too, and when I came to him 2 days ago, thinking that he still loved me, he laughed and he had me whipped. Oh, come away." "I can't," said Lisa brokenly, "but you shall go. Here, take my dress, give me your robe. The chauffeur won't know the difference. Tell him to drive to the Grand Hotel. Ask for Lavinia King. I'll get word to you tomorrow, and money if you need it, but I can't go." The last words dripped out icily from the frozen waters of her soul. Quickly the girl dressed herself in Lisa's clothes, then she threw the white robe over her. La Giuffria never thought of the symbolism of the action. She would have rather stood naked before 1,000 men than appear in that garment of infamy. The girl pressed one soft kiss upon her forehead, then was gone, headlong through the curtains. Lisa heard the clang of the outer door, and a breath of cold air swept round the room. It dizzied her, as if she had been drunk. She remembered no more. Probably she slept. At last she came to consciousness again in a most strange state of being. A peculiar smell was in the air, something as of the sea. She felt a physical exhilaration incomparable. Her mind was still quite blank as to the past. She was not even surprised at her surroundings. She rose and began to stretch her arms in a dozen physical exercises. Just as she touched her toes for the 10th time, the door behind her opened. Sister Cybele was standing there. "Come, sister," she cried. "It will be dawn in 3 minutes. First we must make the adoration of the sun, and then comes breakfast." The horror of the night returned to Lisa in a flash, but somehow it receded into a deeper stratum of her being. When it came to a question of any possible action, she seemed remote. She had the horrible fancy that she had died in the night. She followed Sister Sibel as she would have followed her executioner to the block. Together they went up a spiral staircase. They came to a large room, circular in shape. It was full of the members of the order in their robes. At the east, where an oriel opened towards the dawn, she could see the figure of Simon If, his eyes fixed, awaiting the rising of the sun. A beam touched his face, and he began, "How unto thee thou art Ra in thy rising, even unto thee that art Ra in thy strength, that travellest over the heavens in thy bark in the uprising of the sun. Tahuti standeth in his splendour at the prow, and Rahu abideth at the helm. How unto thee from the abodes of night." It seemed to her that the whole assembly, united in the singular gesture with which Simon If accompanied his words, was uplifted in some subtle way beyond her understanding. The crowd psychology assailed her, and she gritted her teeth to curse this hypocrisy of devilry. But at that moment the crowd broke like a wave upon the beach, and she saw a girl running upon her. "Oh, you were splendid, sister," cried a voice, and 2 scarred arms were thrown about her neck. It was the girl of the night before. "Didn't you escape?" babbled Lisa, incoherent. But the child's ringing laughter silenced her. "I forgive you for spoiling my record," she bubbled over. "You know I'm supposed to get them 5 times in 6. Lisa stood bewildered, but Sister Sibel was wringing her hands and kissing her, and Cyril Grey was telling the child that he had first claim on the stranglehold. And then they all suddenly melted from her. Simon If was walking towards her, and his hand was open. "I congratulate you, sister," he said solemnly, "upon your initiation to our holy order. You have well earned the robe in which you stand, for you have paid its price, service to others without thought of the consequence to yourself. Let us break our fast." And he took Lisa's arm. Presently they came to the refectory. As in a well-rehearsed play, everyone fell into his place, and before Lisa realized the utter subversion that had taken place in her being, Sister Sibel was on her feet, proclaiming, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Lisa thought that breakfast the most delicious she had ever tasted in her life. A great reaction from the strain of the previous 24 hours was upon her. She had lived a lifetime in that period, and in a sense she had most surely died and been reborn. She felt like a little child. She wanted to climb onto everybody's knee and be hugged. She had regained at a single stroke the infant's faith in human nature. She looked at the universe as simply as a great artist does, for in him too lives and rejoices the eternal babe. But her greatest surprise was in her physical health and energy. She had passed through a fierce and furious day, a night of infernal torture, yet she was unaccountably buoyant, eager, assiduous in every act, from her smiled word of pleasure to the drinking of her coffee. Everything at that meal seemed matter of intoxication. She had not previously realized that toast, properly understood, was a superior stimulant to brandy. When breakfast ended, she could not have walked across the room. It was dancing or nothing, so she said to herself. Somehow she found herself once more in the chapel of abominations. On the altar was laid a sprig of gorse, and the sunlight, streaming through the apex of the vault, made its thorny bloom of the very fire and colour of day. Simon If stood behind the altar. Cyril Grey was on her right hand, Sister Sibel on her left. They joined their hands about her. "I will now complete the formality of your reception," said the old man. "Say after me, I, your name." "I, Lisa La Giuffria, solemnly promise to devote myself," she repeated the phrase, "to the discovery of my true purpose in this life." She echoed it in a lower tone. All 3 concluded, "So mote it be." "I receive you into this order," said Simon If. "I confirm you in the robe which you have worn. I greet you with the right hand of fellowship, and I induct you to the gate of the great work." Still holding the hand which he had grasped, he led her from the chapel. They passed through the refectory and entered a room on its other side. This room was furnished as a library. There was nothing in it to suggest magic. "This is the hall of learning," said Simon If. "Here must your work begin, and innocent as it seems, it is 1,000-fold more dangerous than the chapel from which you have come forth with so much credit." Lisa seated herself and prepared to listen to the exposition of her task in life which she expected to follow. But she could not know why the old mystic was at so great pains, as he afterwards proved, to make every syllable of his discourse intelligible, for she had not heard his conference with Cyril Grey at the moment when Sister Cybele had called her. "Brother Cyril," the old mystic had said, "I shall go on. I shall even put more than necessary care into the work, as if this were victory and not defeat. I tell you that you will never do anything yourself, still less anything for others, so long as you rely on women. This victory of the woman's is only the chance resultant of a chaos of emotional states. She's in it for the fun of the thing. She's not even an artist. She's merely the female of the species, and I do not alleviate the situation by one further precision. Your species." "Are women no use? Why were they made?" asked Cyril, angry. He did not know that his question was prompted by a desire yet unconquered in himself. But Simon If answered him with mock humility. "I am unskilled to unravel the mysteries of the universe. Like Sir Isaac Newton, I am—" But seeing the muffled rage in the boy's eyes, he spared him the conclusion. Chapter 8 of the Homunculus. Conclusion of the former argument concerning the nature of the soul. "I'm going to be perfectly horrid," said Simon If, leaning over to Lisa and measuring his words with the minutest care. "I'm going to do everything possible to damp your enthusiasm. I would rather have you start from cold and spark up well as you go, than have you go off with a spurt and find yourself without petrol in the middle of the big rise. I want you to take up this research because of your real love of knowledge, not because of your passion for Brother Cyril. And I tell you honestly that I am mortally afraid for you, because you live in extremes. It is good for a swift push to have that sudden energy of yours, but no research in science is to be taken by storm. You need infinite patience, nay, even infinite indifference to the very thing on which your heart is set." Well, I have prated. The old man must utter his distrust of fiery youth, so we'll go on. "I'm going to talk to you about the soul again. Remember our conception of it, the idea that seemed to do away with all the difficulties at a blow. We had the idea of a soul, of a real physical substance, one of whose substances, or rather boundary solids, was what we call body and mind. Body and mind are real too, and truly belong to the soul, but are only minute aspects of it, just as any ellipse or hyperbola is an aspect of the section of a cone. We'll take just one more analogy in the lower dimensions as we passed. How do solids know one another? Almost entirely by their surfaces, except in chemistry, which we have reason to believe to be a fourth-dimensional science. Witness the phenomena of polarization and geometrical isomerism. Solids only make contact superficially. Then, shifting the analogies we did before, how do fourth-dimensional beings know one another? By their bounding solids. In other words, my soul speaks to yours through the medium of our minds and bodies. That is the common phrase? Quite so, but I am using it in an absolute physical sense. A line can only be aware of another line at a point of contact, a plane of another plane at the line where they cut, a cube of another cube at the surface common to both, and the soul of another soul where their ideas are in conjunction. I do want you to grasp this with every fibre in your being. I believe it to be the most important thesis ever enunciated, and you will be proud to learn that it is wholly Brother Cyril's, with no help from me. Hinton, Roos, Ball, and others laid the foundations, but it was he that put it in such a clear light, and correlated it with occult science. "You must give the honour to the Maharaphara Fang," interjected Cyril. "I was proving to him the metaphysical nature of the soul, and he regarded me with so amused a smile that I perceived my asinity. Of course there can be but one order of nature." "In any case," continued If, "this theory of Cyril's wipes the slate clean of every metaphysical speculation. Good and evil vanish instantly, with realism and nominalism and free will and determinism, and all the isms and all the ologies. Life is reduced to mathematical formulae, indeed as the Victorian scientists rightly wish to do. But at the same time mathematics is restored to her royal pre-eminence as not only the most exact, but the most exalted of the sciences. The intelligible order of things, moreover, becomes natural and inevitable, and such moral problems as the cruelty of organic life return to their real insignificance. The almost comic antinomy between man's size and his intelligence is reduced, and although the mystery of the universe remains unsolved, at least it is a rational mystery, and neither senseless nor intolerable. Let us now come down to a simple practical point. Here is a soul anxious to communicate with other souls. He can only do it by obtaining a mind and body. Now you'll notice, taking that cone image of ours again, that any section of it is always one of 3 regular curves. It would not fit into a square, for example, however you turned it. And so our soul has to look about for some mind which will fit one of his sections. There's a great deal of latitude, no doubt, for the mind grows and is at first very plastic. But there must be some sort of relation. If I am a wandering soul and wish to communicate with the soul now manifesting a section of itself as Professor of Electricity at Oxford, it is useless for me to take the mind of a Hottentot. Cyril sighed it out. I'm going to digress for a moment. Look at the finished product, the soul incarnated, as we may call it. There are 3 forces at work upon it, the soul itself, the heredity, and the environment. A clever soul will therefore be careful to choose the embryo, which seems most likely to be fairly free in the 2 latter respects. It will look for a healthy stock, for parents who will and can give the child every chance in life. You must remember that every soul is, from our point of view, a genius, for its world is so incalculably greater than ours that one spark of its knowledge is enough to kindle a new epoch in mankind. But heredity and environment usually manage to prevent any of this coming to light. No matter how full of whisky a flask may be, you will never make it drunk. So we may perhaps conceive of some competition between souls for possession of different minds and bodies, or let us say, to combine the ideas, different embryos. I hope you notice how this theory removes the objection to reincarnation, that one's mind does not remember the last time. Why should our cone make connection between its different curves? Each is so unimportant to it that it would hardly think of doing so. Yet there might be some similarity between successive curves, in our case lives, that might make an historian suspect that they were connected, just as a poet's style would be constant in some respects, whether he wrote a war story or a love lyric. You see, of course, by the way, how this theory does away with all the nonsense about are the planets inhabited, with its implication of idiotic waste if they be not. To us, every grain of dust, every jet of hydrogen on the sun's envelope is the manifestation of a section of some soul. And here we find ourselves quite suddenly and unexpectedly in line with some of the old Rosicrucian doctrines. This brings us to the consideration of certain experiments made by our predecessors. They had quite another theory of souls, at least their language was very different to ours, but they wanted very much to produce a man who should not be bound up in his heredity, and should have the environment which they desired for him. They started in paraphysical ways, that is, they repudiated natural generation altogether. They made figurines of brass and tried to induce souls to indwell them. In some accounts we read that they succeeded. Friar Bacon was credited with one such homunculus, so was Albertus Magnus, and I think Paracelsus. He had at least a devil in his longsword which taught him all the cunning pranks of past and future mountebanks, or Samuel Butler, first of that dynasty, has lied. But other magicians sought to make this homunculus in a way closer to nature. In all these cases they had held that environment could be modified at will by the application of talismata, or sympathetic figures. For example, a 9-pointed star would attract the influence which they called lunar, not meaning the actual moon, but an idea similar to the poet's ideas of her, by surrounding an object with such stars, with similarly disposed herbs, perfumes, metals, talismans, and so on, and by carefully keeping off all the other influences by parallel methods. They hoped to invest the original object, so treated, with the lunar qualities and no others. I am giving the briefest outline of an immense subject. Now then, they proceeded to try to make the homunculus on very curious lines. Man, said they, is merely a fertilized ovum, properly incubated. Heredity is there even at first, of course, but in a feeble degree. Anyhow, they could arrange any desired environment from the beginning if they could only manage to nourish the embryo in some artificial way, incubate it, in fact, as is done with chickens today. Furthermore, and this is the crucial point, they thought that by performing this experiment in a specially prepared place, a place protected magically against all incompatible forces, and by invoking into that place some one force which they desired, some tremendously powerful being, angel or archangel, and they had conjurations which they thought capable of doing this, that they would be able to cause the incarnation of beings of infinite knowledge and power, who would be able to bring the whole world into light and truth. I may conclude this little sketch by saying that the ideas has been almost universal in one form or another. The wish has always been for a Messiah or a Superman, and the method some attempt to produce man by artificial or at least abnormal means. Greek and Roman legend is full of stories in which this mystery is thinly veiled. They seem mostly to derive from Asia Minor and Syria. Here exogamic principles have been pushed to an amusing extreme. I need not remind you of the Persian formula for producing a magician, or of the Egyptian routine in the matter of Pharaoh, or of the Mohammedan device for inaugurating the millennium. I did remind Brother Cyril, by the way, of this last point, and he did need it, but it did him no good. For here we are at the threshold of a great experiment on yet another false track. He is only taunting me to put me on my mettle, laughed Cyril. Now I'm going to bring all this to a point, went on the old mystic. The Greeks, as you know, practiced a kind of eugenics. Of course, all tribal marriage laws are primarily eugenic in intention. But like the medieval magicians we were speaking of, with their homunculus, the Greeks attached the greatest possible importance to the condition of the mother during gestation. She was encouraged to look upon only beautiful statues, to read only beautiful books. The Mohammedans, again, whose marriage system makes Christian marriage by comparison a thing for cattle, shut up a woman during that period, keeping her perfectly quiet and free from the interference of her husband. This is all very good, but it falls short of Brother Cyril's latest lunacy. As I understand him, he wishes indeed to proceed normally in a physical sense, to prepare the way by making the hereditary and environment as attractive as possible to one special type of soul, and then to go soul fishing in the fourth dimension. Thus he will have a perfectly normal child, which yet is also a homunculus in the medieval sense of the word. And he has asked me to lend you the villa of the order at Naples for the purpose. Lisa had leant forward, her face between her hands was burning. Slowly she spoke. You know that you are asking me to sacrifice my humanity. She was not silly enough to pretend to misunderstand the proposal, and Simon liked her better for the way she took it. He thought a moment. I see now. I never thought of it before, and I am foolish. The conservatism of woman calls this sort of thing a heartless experiment, yet nothing is further from our thoughts. There will be no action to annoy or offend you, on the contrary, but I understand the feeling. It is the swift, natural repugnance to discuss what is sacred. Tut, tut, my memory is always failing me these days, muttered Cyril. I've quite forgotten the percentage of children that were born blind in 1861. Lisa started to her feet. She did not know what he meant, but in some way it stung her like a serpent. Simon If intervened. Brother Cyril, you always use strong medicine, he said, shaking his head. I sometimes think you're too keen to see your results. I hate to beat about the bush. I see the thing that can never be forgotten. Or forgiven sometimes, said the old man in gentle reproof. But come, my dear, sit down. He meant truth, after all, and truth cuts only to cure. It's a brutal fact that children used to be born blind, literally by the thousands, because it wasn't quite nice to publish the facts about certain diseases, and precautions against them were called heartless experiments. What Cyril is asking you to do is no more than what your whole heart craves for. Only he wants to crown that with a gift to humanity, such as has never yet been given. Suppose that you succeed, that you can attract a soul to you who will find a way to abolish poverty, or to cure cancer, or to... Oh, surely you glow with vision, 1,000 heights of human progress thrusting their sunlight snows through the clouds of doubt. Lisa rose again to her feet, but her mood was no longer the same. She put her hands in Simon If's. I think you're a very noble man, she said, and it's an honour to work in such a cause. Cyril took her in his arms. Then you will come with me to Naples, to the master's own villa? She looked at If with a queer smile. May I make a joke? She said. I should like to rechristen the villa, the Butterfly Net. Simple Simon laughed with her like a child. It was just the delicate humour that appealed to him, and the classical allusion to the butterfly as allegorical of the soul showed him a side of the girl that he had hardly suspected. But Cyril Grey swerved instantly to the serious aspect of the problem. "We have merely been discussing an A-B case," he said. "We have forgotten where we stand. Somewhere or other I've made a blunder already, mark you. And we have the Black Lodge on our trail. You may possibly recall some of the events of yesterday," he concluded with a touch of his old airy manner. "Yes," said Simon, "I think you'd better get to business." "We discussed the thing on general lines during your vigil last night," said Cyril. "Our first need is defence. The strongest form of defence is counter-attack, but you should arrange for that to take shape as far as possible from the place you are defending. In this game you're keeping goal, Lisa. I am full-back. Simple Simon is the captain playing at half-back, and I think we have a fairly fit 11, so that's all right. There is reason to believe that the enemy's goal is in Paris itself, and if we can keep the ball in their half all through the game, you and I can spend a very quiet year in Italy." "I can't follow all that football slang, but do explain why anyone should want to interfere with us. It's too silly." "It's only silly when you get to the very distant end of a more abstruse philosophy. On the surface it's obvious. It's the objection of the burglar to electric lights and bells. You can imagine him having enough foresight to vote against a town councillor who proposed an appropriation for the study of science in general. Something might turn up which would put him out of business." "But what is your business?" "Ultimately you may call it selfishness, only that's a dreadful word and will mislead you. We're just as selfish, only we realise that other things beyond our own consciousnesses are equally ourselves. For instance, I try to unite myself as intimately as I can with every other mind or body or idea that comes in my way. To take that cone simile, I want to be all the different curves I can, so as to have a better chance of realising the cone. The Black Lodge magician clings to his one curve, tries to make it permanent, to exalt it above all other curves, and of course the moment the cone shifts, out he goes. Pop!" "Observe the poet," remarked Simon. "He values himself enormously, but his idea of perpetuating himself is to make the beauty that is inherent in his own soul radiate beyond him, so as to illume every other mind in the world. But your black magician is secret and difficult of access. He isn't going to tell anyone anything, not he. So even his knowledge tends to extinction in the long run." "But you are yourselves a secret society," exclaimed Lisa. "Only to secure freedom from interruption. It is merely the same idea as that which makes every householder close his doors at night, or better, as public libraries are guarded by certain regulations. We can't allow lunatics to scrawl over our unique manuscripts and tear the pages out of all our books. Shallow people are always chattering about science being free to all. The truth is that it is guarded as no other secret ever was in all history, by the simple fact that, with all the help in the world, it takes half a lifetime to begin to master even one small section of it. We guard our magic just as much and as little as our other branches of physics. But people are so stupid that, though they know it requires years of training to use so simple an instrument as a microscope, they are indignant that we cannot teach them to use the Veridin in an hour." "Ah, but they complain that you have never proved the use of the Veridin at all." "Only those who have not learnt its use. I can read Homer, but I can only prove the fact to another man by teaching him Greek, and he is then obliged to do the same to a third party, and so on. People generally acquiesce that some men can read Homer because, well, it's their intellectual laziness. A really stout intelligence would doubt it. Spiritualism and Christian Science, which are either fraud or bluff or misinterpretation of facts, has spread all over the Anglo-Saxon world because there is no true critical spirit among the half-educated. But we are not willing to have our laboratories invaded by reporters and curiosity-mongers. We are dealing with delicate forces. We have to train our minds with an intensity which no other study in the world demands. Public indifference and incredulity suit us perfectly. The only object of advertisement would be to get suitable members, but we have methods of finding them without publicity. We make no secret of our methods and results, on the other hand, but only the right man knows how to discover them. It is not as if we were working in an old field where all the terms were defined, and the main laws ascertained. In magic, even more than in any other science, the student must keep his practice level with his theory. Don't you ever do magic under test conditions? Unfortunately, my child, creative magic, which is the thaumaturgic side of the business, depends on a peculiar excitation which objects to test conditions very strongly. You might as well ask Cyril to prove his poetic gift, or even his manhood, before a set of fools. He will produce you poems and infants and events, as the case may be, but you have more or less to take his word for it that he did the acts responsible primarily for them. Another difficulty about true magic is that it is so perfectly a natural process that its phenomena never excite surprise by their timelines, so that one has to record hundreds of experiments to set up a case which will even begin to exclude coincidence. For instance, I want a certain book. I use my book-producing talisman. The following day a bookseller offers me the volume. One experiment proves nothing. My ability to do it every time is the proof, and I can't even do that under test conditions, for it is necessary that I should really want the book in my subconsciousness, whose will works the miracle. It is useless for me to think or pretend that I want it. Any man may fluke a 10-shot at billiards, but you call him a player only when he can average a break of 30 or so every time he goes to the table. But in some branches of magic we can give proof on the spot. In any branch, that is where the female and not the male part of us is concerned. The analogy is quite perfect. Thus, in my guest at your birth hour, was not that a test? I will do it all day and be right 5 times in 6. Furthermore, in the event of error, I will show exactly why I was wrong. It's a case where one is sometimes right to be wrong, as I will explain one day. Then again, your own clairvoyance. I did not tell you what sort of a thing to look for, yet you saw it under the same form as I did. You shall practice these things daily with Cyril if you like, always checking your results in a way which he will show you, and in a month you will be an expert. Then if you feel you want to advertise, do, but you won't. Besides, the real trouble is that not one person in 1,000 cares for any form of science whatever, even such base applications of science as the steam engine, and all its family, from the telegraph to the automobile, were only thrust upon the unwilling people by bullies who knew that there was money in them. Who are your men of science in the popular notion of today? Edison and Marconi, neither of whom ever invented anything, but were smart businessmen with the capacity to exploit the brains of others, and turn science to commercially useful and profitable ends. Hey-ho! We're a long way from our subject, said Cyril. I have had a delightful morning. I felt like Plato with the good, the true and the beautiful, in contemplating you free. But we have work before us. I propose, in this emergency, to copy the tactics of Washington at Valley Forge. We will make a direct and feminine attack on the Black Lodge. They will expect me to be in my usual position in the van. I will slip away with Lisa while the fires blaze brightest. A sound plan, said Simon. Let us break up this conference and put it immediately into execution. You had better not attract attention by collecting luggage, and you must certainly take no person outside the order into your circle. So after dinner you will put on your other clothes, walk down to the metro, cross to the Gare de Lyon, and jump into the Rome Rapide. Wire me when you arrive at the Butterfly Net.